いらっしゃいませ。
In Japan, there is a word for the bittersweet ache of a beautiful moment passing, mono no aware, the realization that because something is fleeting, it is precious. Long before it was a global icon or a postcard cliché, the Sakura, the cherry blossom, was a god. Or, more accurately, a vessel for one. To the ancient farmers of the Nara period, these were more than trees. They believed the mountain deity, the Sa no Kami, descended from the peaks each spring to dwell within the blossoms. The Sa referred to the god, and Kura meant his pedestal. The Sakura was the world's first weather app. When the pale petals unfurled, the god had arrived. It was the signal to sow the rice fields. The timing of the bloom determined the survival of the village. If the god stayed long, the harvest would be plenty. If the petals fell too soon, hardship was coming. But as the centuries passed, the Japanese people saw more than just a harvest clock in those branches. They saw a mirror. They saw a life lived with such intensity that it would rather fall at its peak than wither on the branch. This is the story of how a simple mountain flower became the soul of a nation. As Japan grew from a collection of villages into a sophisticated empire, the Sakura faced a rival. For centuries, the Japanese aristocracy looked toward China as the ultimate peak of civilization, and China's heart belonged to a different flower, the ume, or the plum blossom. The plum was the elegant elder sibling. It bloomed in the dead of winter, representing endurance, scholarly wisdom, and highbrow Chinese philosophy. If you were a poet in the 8th century, you wrote about the plum. To love the sakura was seen as a bit common. Then came the Heian period, a golden age where Japan began to look inward. The court in Kyoto wanted an aesthetic that didn't just copy the mainland. They wanted a soul that was uniquely theirs. They found it in the sakura's fragility. The official coronation happened in the year 812. Emperor Saga held the first recorded hanami, a flower viewing party, at the Shinsen-en Garden in Kyoto. By choosing the cherry blossom over the plum, the emperor wasn't just throwing a party, he was declaring cultural independence. The cherry blossom became the rebellious younger sibling that won the family's heart. It moved from the muddy fields of the peasants to the gold-leafed screens of the palace. It was no longer just a signal to plant rice, it was now the official signature of the Japanese spirit. As the refined air of the imperial court gave way to the era of the shoguns, the sakura underwent a transformation. It left the garden and went to war. There is a saying from this time,
話は応募人は無視.
Among flowers, the cherry blossom, among men, the warrior. To the samurai, most flowers were a disgrace. They withered, turned brown, and clung to the stem long after their beauty had vanished. But the sakura, it falls at the very height of its brilliance. It doesn't decay on the branch. It detaches while it is still perfect. This became the clean death. For a warrior, to die in battle at your peak was to be a falling petal. But centuries later, this poetic ideal was twisted into something far more literal and far more tragic. During the Second World War, the Japanese government weaponized the sakura. It was no longer a metaphor for a warrior's spirit, it was a tool of state propaganda. Young men, barely out of school, were told they were the falling petals of the empire. The government encouraged them to believe that by crashing their planes into enemy ships, they were fulfilling the ancient destiny of the sakura. The flower of life had become the flower of death. The symbol that once celebrated the harvest and the court had been used to romanticize the ultimate sacrifice. In the wake of the war, Japan lay in ruins, but as the nation began to rebuild, the landscape underwent a transformation that was as much a feat of engineering as it was an act of nature. The pink clouds we associate with Japan today, the ones that draw millions of tourists every spring, are not ancient forests. They are the Somei Yoshino. Developed by botanists in the late 19th century, this specific variety is particularly interesting as every tree is a clone. Because every Yoshino cherry tree is genetically identical, they don't bloom according to their own individual whims. They respond to the temperature with mathematical precision. When the warmth hits a certain threshold, every tree in the area wakes up at exactly the same time. It creates a literal wave of blossoms called the Sakura Zensen that washes over the islands from south to north. This wasn't just a landscape returning, it was a nation finding its rhythm. The unified look of Japan's spring isn't an accident of nature, it's a reflection of a nation that decided to grow back together in total harmony after being broken apart. But the Sakura could not be contained by the borders of an island nation. These clones were about to become Japan's most successful ambassadors. The most famous act of cherry blossom diplomacy occurred in 1912, when the mayor of Tokyo gifted 3,000 trees to the city of Washington, D.C. It was a gesture of growing friendship, a living bridge between East and West. After the devastation of the Second World War, the tree underwent its most vital transformation. The government and the people worked to scrub the blossom of its military associations. It was no longer a symbol of falling for the emperor. It became a symbol of living for peace. By gifting these trees to former enemies, Japan used the Sakura to turn a new leaf. The blossom became a universal language of rebirth and reconciliation. It was the ultimate rebranding. A flower that once was used to rally soldiers to war was now the global signal for the arrival of a peaceful spring. The global branch proved that while the roots of the sakura are firmly in Japanese soil, its beauty belongs to the world. Today, Japan is a landscape of neon and silicon, a world moving at the speed of light. But every spring, the entire nation stops to appreciate the beauty that has arrived. In a country that prides itself on pinpoint punctuality, one of the most important news events of the year is a forecast of nature. Just as the ancient farmers watched the mountains for the gods' arrival, modern Japan watches the news for the first bud to break. From the skyscrapers of Shinjuku to the quiet temples of Kyoto, millions of people gather for Hanami. It is more than just a picnic, it is a spiritual reset. In a world that demands we always look forward, the Sakura forces us to look up, to acknowledge that life, for all its noise and technology, is still governed by the same fleeting beauty that ancient farmers used to time their crops. The Sakura remains the soul of Japan because it is a mirror. It has been a god, a signature of independence, a warrior's code, and a peace offering. It reminds us that nothing lasts forever, and that is exactly why it is beautiful. The petal falls, the season turns, and for one brief, brilliant week, a nation sees its soul in full bloom. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more videos about Japan.